all the joy is lived really in the valley, in the grind, in the relationships, in the experience, in the discovery and solving. This just launched an incredible mindset shift to me, but also just changed my life and how I think about leading people. I started over and I went out and said, I'm going to do 20 years of learning in 1 year. And I started to write the startup playbook. I did 40 interviews with the best living entrepreneurs that I knew, friends of friends. The journey of sort of becoming friends with your mind, which is going to take half your life. So being patient with the journey.
Welcome to In Search of Excellence, which is about our quest for greatness and our desire to be the very best we can be, to learn, educate, and motivate ourselves to live up to our highest potential. It's about planning for excellence and how we achieve excellence through incredibly hard work, dedication, and perseverance. It's about believing in ourselves and the ability to overcome the many obstacles we all face on our way there. Achieving excellence is our goal, and it's never easy to do. We all have different backgrounds, personalities, and surroundings, and we all have different routes on how we hope and want to get there. My guest today is my good friend, David Kidder. David is a serial entrepreneur, active angel investor, advisor to Fortune 500 companies, sought-after speaker, and author of 4 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, the Startup Playbook and the Intellectual Devotional, one of which is behind me today, and I hope you all go out and buy it. David has been a co-founder and CEO of 3 venture-backed startups, including Clickable, SmartRay, and Bionic, where he is currently its CEO. In 2008, David won the prestigious Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year Award. David, it's a true pleasure to have you on my show. Welcome to In Search of Excellence.
Oh, I'm incredibly grateful to be here, my friend, and look forward to the conversation.
You grew up in upstate New York in a small town called Delmore, in a middle-class family. Tell us about your paper route, your Wilson string tennis racket that you put on layaway at Montgomery Ward, and what you were like as a kid.
I've done your homework. These are first questions. Loving home, wonderful parents, psychologist and a writer, and 2 older sisters, a younger brother, and lots of memories. Not a lot of resources, but lots of love. And learned if I was going to sort of experience things, first experiences in life, I'd probably have to go create a lot of them. And that started with a paper route and just jobs that turned into companies that turned into a career. You mentioned the Wilson Sting. It's actually probably one of my greatest treasures of my life. I was starting to play tennis at 10 or 11 years old. And of course, I only wanted what I couldn't afford at the time. And so I had to put this Wilson Sting on layaway for 2 years. And got a paper route up at 5:30 in the morning, in upstate New York, snow, rain, it was craziness. And eventually, after about 2 years, I was able to obtain it. And it's in my office, my other house. So I treasure it.
Isn't it great to keep those first mementos? I mean, it's hard to save them as a kid, but when you have them and you look at them every day, it's a reminder of where you were and how far you've come.
Yeah, of course, the things that create us, the relationships, the people, a lot of, everyone experiences trauma in one form or another. But just the perseverance of moving through those things and having the courage to ask hard questions of yourself and about your life and who you're becoming is, these are the artifacts along the way. And I think it's important to save artifacts. I have just over my head here, I have several of the last couple of years of different patents and trademarks and pictures of all the co-founders of companies. And they just remind you that there's so many small things that happen on the way that turn out to be big. And it's important to save them because you'll create more. And it's important to create more. There are mile markers on the way looking forward.
A lot of our viewers and listeners have never heard of Montgomery Ward. It dates us a little bit. Can you please explain what Montgomery Ward is and if you know what happened to it and how it's even relevant to what's going on today with some of the retailers that we've seen fail over the last 20 years?
That's so funny. Yes, it's an equivalent to a Sears or a Kmart, probably, I guess, maybe a little more down market version of Macy's 30, 40 years ago, but one of the original sort of like, small town retailers, and not unlike most, supporting, local communities was important. And then over time, the Costco's and Sam Clubs and Walmarts, and then eventually Amazon's just eroded that share. They disappeared. We still have, I guess Sears will be the most equivalent in this era of a bygone big box retailer, but Montgomery Ward was one of them.
What's left of Sears today? Because Sears is definitely not the company it used to be. I grew up in Michigan, suburban Michigan. Kmart was all the rage. They were based in Troy, Michigan. I wrote my senior paper on Kmart, which at that point was the gold standard, the platinum standard of all retailers. But you look at the financial engineering of Sears and what happened to when a hedge fund manager took it over. Can these private equity firms or hedge funds come in today and just say, hey, I'm going to buy this. I've never run this business, but I'm going to cut costs and increase profitability. Does that model work?
I mean, it's sort of, I think the thesis behind Eddie Lampert's play to acquire that company and then try to create value out of a dying asset was not unlike a baby Buffett, right? Which was, hey, we have this asset and we can create value where others don't seek value, or there's some sort of annuity out of it. There's a very famous HBS case study where a private equity company bought Harley Davidson. And the secret is that they had two theses. One is, we're going to fire McKinsey, right, who is spending tens of millions of dollars in fees, was a way to underwrite this transaction. Secondly is that there was more value hanging in the ceiling in the factory of Harley Davidson parts than it was the value of the company. And I think that Sears was probably similar to that in the real estate assets. So real estate assets of Sears were in a separate company over a couple of years. I had a friend who actually run that business. And, the play was, yes, we have retailing, but more importantly, we have footprint, warehousing, distribution systems that we could leverage and create value from where others couldn't. So I don't think that's the way it played out. As we know, the story's constant sort of restructuring and financing and recapitalization, mostly from himself, but lots of lessons on, the private equity model as a refounding model as opposed to a sort of a conviction type of investor.
You got a lot of friends who own non-public private companies that do well. All the private equity firms call them on a regular basis. Hey, let me buy part of your company. They usually want control, but sometimes they don't need control. And so many times they think, okay, I want to put money in my pocket. I don't want to go public, but it doesn't work out. They now have a boss. They can't even write a check over a certain threshold, $10,000, whatever the case may be. And I know many companies that sold for $1 billion, $250 million, where the purchasers ran into the ground. They didn't know how to run it. And then the founders bought it back for a fraction, pennies on what they sold it for. What's your advice to the people out there who are considering that kind of move? I know you know tons of people that own private companies. During the SPAC craze, they all got phone calls. Hey, let me take you public. Those SPACs were a disaster. I think 90% of them are going to go BK, and I think something like 90% of them are below where they went, quote unquote, public. What's the advice to all those companies out there who are getting contacted by these private equity firms? Let us buy part of your company.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but before we jump back in, I want to know if you've ever thought about what you need to do to reach the next level of success in your life. Over the last 25 years, I've been an advisor to more than 50 companies. I've invested nearly 100, including Google, Lyft, and Seagate, and I also co-founded a company that today is worth more than $15 billion. I've been incredibly blessed in my journey, and at this stage in my life, I want to give back. I want to share the lessons I've learned so you can reach incredible success way faster than I did. In my own journey, I've learned that having the right mentor is a massive advantage to achieving our goals. I'm hugely passionate about mentoring others, and I'm looking for a few hungry entrepreneurs who are excited to take action on their journey to incredible future success. So if that's you, I've got an opportunity. In the description of this video, there's a link where you can apply to work with me. All you need to do is answer a few simple questions, and if you're a good fit, my team will reach out so we can build a game plan together. All right, now let's get back to the video.
I don't think there's any truth to buying or selling any part of your company. When you sell your company, whether it's 10 or 30% or 51%, you're selling your company. Money is debt. It has a voice. It has control. There is no scenario where it doesn't. Sometimes you need a lot of capital to maintain a high growth rate of a company or continue to maximize the profit of a company that you own. But be of no illusion that once you sell, 1 or 51% or 80%, it's no longer yours. And I've had 4 exits. I've had 2 that worked, 2 that didn't. Most recently was to Accenture about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, which has worked quite successfully. But the reality is that if you can bootstrap and grow a company and maintain control, you own that control until you sell that first dollar to private equity, and to some extent that sort of second or third dollar to a venture capitalist. So that's a kind of philosophical lens to view it through. I've done both. I've raised a tremendous amount of venture capital for 2 companies and bootstrap 2. So I feel that the job of a founder is really, this is not new information, is really 3 things. It's to have a vision, number 1, and be right and on time, right? Knowing the outside forces, knowing the need in the world, and knowing why us, and having conviction that. 2 is really about just talent, is, putting the right people in the right seats at the right time for the right amount of time. And you basically can't make a mistake, 1 through 20, and 2 or 3, 20 through 50, and maybe 5 people, 50 through 100. And if you make those mistakes, it's almost always fatal. You get them in the job, the wrong seat, you have to remove them, replace them. It's 12 months and you're out of business. And the third is just never run out of money. So you can either raise it or earn it. And it's the same thing. It's oxygen, and you have a lot more control for longer when you create your own oxygen. And I'm a huge believer in that.
As you said, it's hard sometimes to hire someone. You have a structural impediment to get rid of them. They have a big contract. They vest in full. I remember one of our portfolio companies, one of my first companies, we recruited one of the top 5 guys from Anderson Consulting, which was one of the biggest consulting firms, very prestigious firm. He had been there, I think, for 30 years, was on their board. We thought, and he just retired. His son lived in Los Angeles. And I thought, gosh, that's a guy we should go after. The head of that firm, George Sheehan, had just gone to a company called Webvan, and that was all the rage. And I thought, gosh, if we can get this guy, that'd be incredible. And we did get him, and it even made the Wall Street Journal. This was back in 99, 2000. So I thought, okay, we're done. He's going to raise a ton of money. He had not worked at a startup, did not know the culture, was very corporate-minded, and it didn't work. What's your advice to the founders out there who are going after to recruit somebody that big? What should they do to prevent that from happening? And when it does happen, what's the best way to get out of that and hire someone else who has the right fit?
Well, I have this model at my last 2 companies called the Timberlake years. And people tease me about this, but Justin Timberlake, regardless of how we feel about his life now, has had a really remarkable career. I guess you could call Taylor Swift a good example of this as well. When you've seen him kind of going from the Mickey Mouse years to the band years, the NSYNC years, the solo years, and then the SNL years. And each one of those chapters is sort of a graduation. It's a hallmark moment where the company moves forward and no longer looks back. And I think it's important to recognize that in each one of those stages, you kind of have to have cultural alignment and mindset and metrics that everyone agrees we're leaving this chapter and all the hard questions that we have good enough answers for, and we're putting it behind us. So nostalgia is the enemy in a way. It's also to say that each one of those chapters on your way from a zygote to a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old to an ugly teenager, it needs different talent. So it's Mr. and Mrs. right now for 12, 18, 24 months until you're no longer that company. So, if you bring someone in who only knows the SNL years or only knows the solo act years versus the Mickey Mouse or NSYNC years, it's almost fatal, because it's the wrong instincts, wrong experience, wrong. They're not bad people. It's that you haven't done the work to get to the SNL years. You haven't earned the right to hire them because you don't need them, and vice versa. They're the wrong people at the wrong time for you. So context and permission alignment as an organization from yourself, when your board and your capital has to be basically perfect. Honestly, there's so many ways to fail than there are to succeed. So that's one of the issues. The second issue is if you have misalignment, as in we realized, wow, we hired this Olympian, this SNL person, and really we're in the NSYNC years. it's really critical for both parties to fix that immediately. Whether that person goes to, Say's public face, so it's a good exit. They take on an executive chairman role, but it's non-compensation. They're an advisor. They stay on the board. There's lots of ways to do that because their value will be valuable eventually if you earn the right. But for them to stay in the organization in those stages and there's misalignment is bad for everyone.
You're young, you're green, you're 25 or 30 years old, you've never started a company before. The younger you are, the more prone to mistakes I think we are. And I remember someone said something to me that I didn't quite get until later on. At some point when you're young, you don't know what good is. What does that mean when someone says you don't know what good is? And who should you rely on to help you determine what good is? For one example, I remember when I was young and we were starting a company, someone had a great resume. They were CEO of this company, SVP of this company, and that person looked phenomenal on paper. But when you really dug in and you did the due diligence on what he was CEO of and what he was senior VP of, it was thin, it was hollow, and it didn't really work. And it came to me that I thought, okay, now I understand that you don't know what good is. So can you talk about that and how, if you're a young entrepreneur starting a company, how we get around that and figure that out as well?
Yeah, just setting down some ideas here. So maybe if you're listening, you might write these words down and think of them as lenses, right? So one is on versus in. Another one might be to versus with. And the second one might do versus say. So on versus in, or on, or in, is really how much time are you spending working in the company versus on the company. And so when you're thinking about what is good and you're spending 100% of your time in the company building the sort of product and the model marketing to sell it, but you actually aren't building the company, you're actually not working on the company. And the balance of those two and your energy and your mindset and your, the sort of truth you're driving to are very different things, and they're equally important. You're just going to spend less time in one than the other in the beginning because you're basically, I like the idea of your assumption should be that you're dead trying to become undead. Not that you're successful, not you should be out there doing thought leadership. I've made those mistakes in the past as well, that the company literally is dead until it's not. And there's always this, inevitability of the business where it's like a step function, like you're literally out of business and all of a sudden it suddenly works. And it's not unlike, how you learn math, like an algorithmically speaking, is you study, you're terrible, and all of a sudden it clicks, right? It's because you're working through the hardest parts of the business. So the first thing is think of am I working on versus in, and how much time am I thinking about those two things because they're equally important. Secondly is the to versus with. Am I selling to the customer, or am I solving with them? And so the question of what is good is really the evidence and the difference between those two tasks. Selling is important, but the first stage of selling is to solve with them. And because the truth lives in this last piece, which is it's not what they say, it's what they do. Right? So we have to look at the evidence, because the one place that will lead you to the promised land, and full circle back to your question, what does good look like? What good looks like is what customers do consistently and always with you, because you solve with them and you built a great organization that can scale both in and on. So these again are mindsets. It's tasks that you're doing. It's the timing of those tasks. And if you're not consciously thinking about your energy and how you're thinking work, you'll get lost in the success theater. You'll get lost in selling, and you'll get lost in working in when you have the other part of your job, which is the on solving and listening business. And it's a totally different way to discover that commercial truth.
The entrepreneur gene runs in your family, not with your parents, but your grandfather, your great-grandfather. Tell us about your uncle, Roger Fronsky. What happened to him when you were 16 years old, and what he told you 7 months after he sold his last company.
Yeah. So, Phil, I have this philosophy that I've had now since 2014 called Becoming. And it's led to all sorts of incredible deep work over the last, now, I guess, 8-10 years. He was my mom's brother, and he was a very successful entrepreneur and psychologist and advisor to some of the great CEOs of our time. You'd know them, the running some of the large media organizations that we consume. But he was a great philosophical leader. And when he sold this company, and he was almost 70 at the time, his last one, he got stage 4 glioblastoma, and he passed away 7 months later. But on the way to the end, which was a new beginning, he and I, obviously, he was my mentor since I was 16. He shared some great wisdom, but the final wisdom of his life to me was a day and a half before he passed away. I was the last to see him. And I was holding his face, and he was paralyzed on one side of his body. We were forehead to forehead. And he said, "Don't focus on who you are to the world, focus on who you're becoming." And it really changed my life, because I had spent, for reasons that I now know, mostly based in trauma and shame, my life trying to get to the top of things, right? And when you get to the top of something, you realize that there's nothing there. All the joy is lived really in the valley, in the grind, in the relationships, in the experience, in the discovery and solving and being of this. And this just launched an incredible mindset shift to me, but also just changed my life and how I think about leading people in my own vulnerability, but also theirs, and what it takes to build great teams, and just really how to run organizations. I'll give you an example of this, and this is one of the things that came from him as well. Is if you want truth, people have to be able to take risks, and if you want people to take risks, they have to be forgiven. So how do you create a culture that believes in excellence, but forgiveness and grace is required to get there? And so it's important not just to create rules in an organization, like here's what we believe and here's the laundry list of things, because people really don't know when they're doing it well. You have to create like doctrine. They need to know when they're doing it right. And what we created, and what I created in my last company over the last 15 years, is this rule called the 7-to-1 rule. We try to do extraordinarily more good than we do bad in that ratio, which is literally statistically impossible. And that's the point, which is we believe in high standards, but no one will ever truly reach them, which means we're going to fail each other. And so the point is, we want you to take risks. We want you to try. We want you to do excellence, but assume that when we make mistakes, that our default state to you is to forgive you, so we can look at the problem shoulder to shoulder, not across the table. Why did you fail? We're promoting that idea shoulder to shoulder, so we can look at it and grow. And when we do that with a cycle of trust and goodwill and forgiveness, we'll get people to live whole lives, and we'll get to the commercial truth with greater trust. And ultimately, that is the whole business, is dead to undead, is getting to a point where commercial truth is what leads the organization, because it's discovered, it's told, and it's converted into growth.
You mentioned the importance of Roger, your uncle, being your mentor. I had several mentors as well, starting with my Little League baseball coach, David Page, who really believed in me from the beginning when I was a young kid, was bullied, stuttered as a kid, and he always had my back. How important are mentors in our success and our future, and how do you earn being a mentor today from if you want to seek a mentor?
I mean, a lot of mentorship is self-serving. It's important, but I think a lot of it's cheap advice, honestly. I mean, mostly it's a transaction of someone who's trying to get something or grow faster, or get access or something, which is all important. There's nothing wrong with it. It just means that the mentors that really change our life, they don't give you cheap advice. They give you their hardest truths about themselves, about you. And so I think, I remember reading this years ago, which is, one of the most powerful lines you can give someone in leading them, a sentence to them, is this idea, which is, I have high expectations of you, and I know you can achieve them. And it's an atomic idea, which is, you yourself have to have high standards, and I have them for you, which means there are expectations for yourself in your life, and that, especially inside of an organization. But the belief in you, what mentors do, whether your boss or someone else, is they have a belief and a conviction in you. Ideally, they actually have done it before, right? So, and in their doing it, they'll have, learning and understanding, empathy for what you're going through to share how they did it, but not telling you what to do. And that's really that's what true mentors do, is they let you learn yourself. My Uncle Roger in particular was an insanely connected guy. I mean, ridiculous. I mean, and he never opened a single door for me in my life. And he could have done it. He could have changed my life at any point from 16 to when he passed away. He helped me learn to care about people more than anyone else. And as a result of that, exchange value and ideas and relationship impact to help build and replicate his giftedness, because he knew it would change my life, and he was right. So mentors do that. They let their life speak. It's not cheap advice, and it comes from a place of deep humility, learning, and empathy.
I want to go back a few years to when you were growing up, graduated high school, went to college. You attended the Rochester Institute of Technology, where you got a BA in industrial design. Was college important to you, and is it necessary in a world today where 65% of students who go to college graduate with an average of $37,000 of student debt, which takes 22 years to pay off? And what's your advice to your own kids going to be on this?
Well, I have three sons, aged almost 13, 16, and 18, and one going through the college application processes this summer. So this is a very active conversation in my life. Well, first is I'm not trying to raise excellent sheep. So, there are to some degree a halo effect around intellect and network value at the top, let's say 20 to 50 schools in the country. And beyond that, none of it matters in my view. It just the diminishing returns is really about their experience and their development as a human. So I look at their college experience not as an accreditation of their intellect, their heart, but also just their growth and their life experience as humans. My father, who's this sweet apostle-like brilliant psychologist, he didn't give me a lot of advice, but he gave me two pieces of advice in my life that were really transformative. But when I walked out of age 18 to go to college, he put his kind arm around me and he said, "Don't come back." And he was kind of dead serious. He was like, he didn't use these words, but like, you got this, and also you own it. And I have told my sons this since they were kids, which is you own your life. Like, your parents are imperfect, failed humans doing their best. See us as such. And what we have is truly unconditional, God-like love for you. But you're going to be on your own soon. You realize this, and this moment's arriving. So helping them game a system that's ungameable, especially in the world of AI and superintelligence, and we're going to become a tool-based, value-based, solution-based, really economy very soon. Getting a degree and perfecting, a skill that's hireable is almost a waste of time. It's really about their ability to think and learn and solve hard problems. And hopefully, I'd add this last thing, which I told the boys, I just started setting them all sorts of articles about what to study horizontally and orthogonally to become prompt engineers, and how can they elevate and co-elevate their ability to solve harder and harder problems that are beyond their intellect, because they understand the tools and the way to think about solving problems. So the commoditization of accreditation is going to accelerate. So that skill is going to be what matters. And so, having studied industrial design, which is sort of engineering and art and problem solving and storytelling, it was a total gift to go to RIT. It's one of the best design schools in the country. I actually won this ID Magazine International Design Award before I left, which was sort of a rare award. And then the dawn of the internet happened. It was 1994, Silicon Graphics boxes and RASNA and Pro Engineer. We were using all these tools. And I started my first internet company at age 20, 21. And RIT taught me to think. And it also taught me how to work extremely hard, like put yourself in the hospital hard. So life was going to be easy by comparison by the time I got into the world relative to how hard I worked. I worked at a startup nearly part-time, 20, 30 hours a week. I was an RA. I played college lacrosse and did a full load. getting out and starting a company was like the beginning of a breeze of hard work for the next 28 years. So that's a lot to say, but I just raise your kids to think independently with the great tools of our generation. And it's not unlike the graduate plastics. We're in a place where AI is not unlike ChatGPT is not like Netscape and HTML for our lives.
You mentioned you have a son going through the college application process, which is one of the most unpleasant, stressful things that they've ever done in your life. For a lot of parents, it's very stressful as well because your kids are stressed, so you're stressed. When you and I were growing up, David, it was all about the GPA, right? You couldn't get a job without a high GPA. Today, a lot of the students still function or want to strive for a high GPA, but in the real world, I think, at least my perspective, it helps you get another meeting with a potential employer. But at the end of the day, are you going to hire somebody with a 3.0 or a 2.6 if they have the right skills and social skills and you like them as people? And as a corollary to that question, how are you advising your own kids, like I did my own kids, about the mental health issues associated with school, the application process? Is it necessary, as you said, to have the mentality that you're going to put yourself in the hospital?
Oh, God, it's a big one. So the GPA thing, I'll just get out of the way. I can't remember the last time I looked at a resume for hiring and even considered the GPA. In fact, I think it's actually a false positive, to be honest with you, unless it's extraordinary. I mean, a scholar is valuable, but like I would just assume if you get to a good school, you're mostly smart, and really it's what you did with it. Did you hustle? Did you create value? Did you continue to learn? Were you curious? One of my late friends was the founder of Zappos, wonderful guy, friends with lots of people, but a very authentic friend. And I remember he was
friend of mine as well. Incredible guy.
And he would, lots of journeys together. I remember he once told me, this is about 4 years ago, because he had no kids. He's just like, what's the most powerful lesson you're trying to raise, Jack, Stephen, and Lucas? And I said, well, it was really about their grittiness, right? Kind of Duckworth's view of the world and something. He goes, well, if I had kids, I think the most profoundly important thing to teach them is curiosity. And I kind of thought of it as sort of a vitamin versus a painkiller, a soft word versus a hard word, right? But the more I've thought about that one thing that he challenged me on was, I think he was completely right. The curiosity as like an atomic skill of asking why, right? Why does that work? Why doesn't work? Why do I feel this way? Why did I do that? Why did you do that? Like the curiosity is the entanglement of our minds with opportunity in the world. And without it, you're sort of you're following. Life is happening to you as opposed to you happening to life. And that fulcrum of curiosity is really what I hope is embedded in my kids' mind for their lives that's going to lead them to grow. You don't grow without curiosity. It is the central sort of chemical in all growth. I guess that's probably one of the most, yes, character and their ethics and all those things, they don't need to be perfect. No one's perfect. But they do need to, I think that's the one gift you can give them is a very deep and committed sense of curiosity about themselves and about the needs of the world and how to grow.
Isn't the applicant with a 3.0 or a 2.8 lazier and doesn't work as hard as the student with the 3.8 or 3.9?
I think it's meaningless. Because if you think about all the types of gifts of skills people have, the ability to test, the ability to study, the advantages of, learning how to take notes and study in class, where you sit, where you're oriented, disease, quite frankly, Lyme disease and the things that we just don't, mental challenges that you can barely see. It's just a single prism into the mind of a child and how they're becoming a human and becoming an adult. So it's a signal, but it's no less important a signal as all the other things you could show as signals about radical curiosity and challenging yourself and you're becoming, right? You're the grit in your journey. Those are more important signals than a GPA.
I mentor a lot of students, high school students, college students. We have a intern program each summer. I know you have generously said you'd love to speak to the interns, and one common theme of stress among all of them is, I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. it's very competitive either to get into college or get a job at Goldman Sachs or a tech company. How should students deal with mental stress, which has come to the forefront, thankfully, of our daily vernacular? And what's your advice to them if they are struggling too much with the mental stress and are having very negative thoughts?
So there's an origin of those struggles, right? And I think this is, again, if you start to really unpack what I'm sort of trying to create a mental model for around the idea of becoming, it's really these curiosity what ignites the answers to these questions, right? About what am I going to do in my life? How am I going to grow? How am I going to survive these things? But if you back up and you think about this at a very high level, and I encourage people to really go as deep as they're comfortable in getting these answers. But think about it this way. Like our lives, our reality, the one we're struggling with, is really an outcome of your choices, right? So it sits on this pillar, the single pillar of our choices. And of course, you're going to say, no kidding, right? And you can read all sorts of structural learning from the outside in on habits and mindset and some amazing authors and thinkers on this stuff. But ultimately, the fatigue or the exhaustion on performing and fixing yourself from the outside in will eventually run its course, right? It's the human nature, right? Because our conscious life, where we're trying to fix that, is really built off of what's below that. It's like being an iceberg in the middle of the ocean. We live at the tip, but our whole reality sits underneath it. So it's important to recognize that our choices really are just at the top of the iceberg. We're disconnected from the reason of the idea that choices are really just intentions. We are intentionally choosing our life, whether it be stress or lack of stress, ownership, lack of ownership, behavior, lack of behavior, whatever those things are. So the question is how do you change an intention if you can't change your choices permanently, which is what we're struggling to do, trying to get to the top of things, because when we get there, we'll be happy. When you really understand that the intentions, the change in intention, you have to get underneath the intention, which is the question of why. Why do I intentionally choose this life? Stressful, unstressful, performant, non-performant, anxious, happy, all the dimensions of that. And so part of becoming is that first stage is just knowing yourself and being curious to ask, why do I intentionally choose this stressful, anxious life? And if you're trying to fix it from the outside in, there's lots of ways to take you out of that journey, right? Drugs and other things, which I understand them. Sometimes the only way through is to go through them, right? There is no escaping. To get to the intention, you got to go through, not out. So once you do the work of knowing, you start to understand why. Then begins the wholeness of the journey, right? Of learning to live. Because what you discover, what's underneath, that there's actually something underneath the why, which is one of only two states, and that is fear or love. And so the more you get connected to the state that you're in, because you understand your why, you know yourself, and now you can heal, right? The second stage is just the receiving of healing. You get to a state of being, right? Being that love as a state. So knowing, receiving, and being that journey really is the journey of sort of becoming friends with your mind, which is going to take half your life. So being patient with the journey, being patient with the questions that you have to live because they're so difficult to receive. When you're young in your 20s, you're just learning, is really important. Sort of surrendering around to the pressure of having the answers. But to come practically into this, and I'm happy to dive into any of those things because they're all sort of the gnosis of those things are real. The question of like, what am I going to do in my life? And I'll just tell you what the advice I give my sons was your second question. And that is really the dimension around being curious to understand the outside forces that are happening in our lifetime. Outside forces drive almost all economic or professional success. It just does. And so anybody who thinks they're self-made or, it was their hard work, all those things being true. But I know lots of people who are self-made and hard work have failed radically, consistently, because they misunderstand the outside forces. Secondly is they understand the needs of the worlds that are either created because of those forces or the ones that have changed because of those forces. So force, need, And lastly, and this is the most important one, is what is your proprietary gift? Like, not just what's your passion, but what's your gift, the impossible to replicate secret of your life that allows you to feel like every 10 hours is 1 hour, that drives your becoming and solving that problem in the world because you have obsessed with the outside forces. When you have that concoction, that conviction going, all the questions of where you're going to spend your time in your life will be answered. You just have to care about them very, very deeply.
What are you going to say to, or what do you say to all of the 19-year-olds or kids in college or even kids or young professionals who are not kids anymore who don't know what their special gift is? How do they find it? And what do you say to people who say, I don't have a special gift?
It's going to take half your life to figure that out, probably. Reset your expectations. I mean, I don't really know. My most successful friends have been working 60, 80, 100-hour weeks for 20 and 30 years. So the idea that you're going to go out there and have the type of success, unless you have the extraordinary good fortune of the outside forces that benefit you, the reality is that you're going to spend half your life, if you ask the right questions, working hopefully in peace and love and those things in a relentless quest to answer that question. And you're going to learn a lot of things until that answer arrives to you because you're probably not ready to understand it. So I wouldn't, it's the wrong question to say, I need to know the answer. I'm struggling on the answer. The question is am I a person will become the answer? And it's a totally different energy. Because it's not just, you're going to work hard no matter what. The question is what is the work of your mind and your effort that's going to produce that answer? So so the first question is what would you tell someone who is seeking that question? The second one was they don't know. A lot of the questions of proprietary gift happen to you. They can originate in trauma. They can originate in tragedy or success. Quite frankly, I would argue that success is a very bad educator. I think of the things that have happened to me, and I've gone through total brokenness, total failure. I built back from zero, and because of that everything I do today was learned in that experience, and it was brutal. But there's no way I would have experienced the moderate success I've had or the things I've done today without going through that. And so that wasn't something I planned. I tried to avoid it like hell. It just was the inevitability of my career, and all the learning happened because of it. And all the character lessons and the joy that's followed has happened because of being broken, quite frankly.
Let's go back to college and your first company. You're 19 years old. What are you seeing out there? What are you motivated by, and what prompted you to start your first company?
I mean, I got exposure to entrepreneurship and the freedom of time young. So running my paper route, I worked for a small sports shop called Mike DeRossi Sports. It was fast and loose. It was a little less. I realized when I wanted to be managed or as a manager, leader versus, player, so to speak, different teams and sports and things. In college, I had very good fortune of joining a startup called the Idea Group, started by Bill Gillette, who really, was a key influencer in my life. He gave me a job, immediately upon meeting him at RIT when he needed some computers fixed, and I just leapt at it. And then ended up working for a number of years, and as a result of that, got exposure to the internet, which was 1995 because of that. And then as much as I loved design, I never worked in design ever again. I became problem solving in the world of digital, which was the equivalent, same stuff. What's the difference between a physical versus a digital product? It's how you think. And then I started first company. We worked doggedly for 2 years, 3 years, and we sold that for a moderate amount. With two very good friends of mine, and then went to New York, did a roll up for 3 years, and another great experience. And then started my next company and built the SaaS company, raised $5 million and sold that for a bunch. And then took a bunch of years off, 2 years off, traveled 42 countries and came back, got married and started a family and started another two companies. Next company failed badly. Next company, you just keep building. And it's just all of that was you know, really trying to continue to take very significant steps forward in my ability to build things, to solve problems. You know, when I wrote the purpose of Bionic before I sold it, was called this idea that we ignite growth revolutions. And I didn't really realize what that meant until I thought about it in the context of money or success for our partners. But the truth is that all of it lives inside your mind. It's in your permission you give yourself. And the greater you continue to take these risks and grow, the greater your permission and the confidence you have to be able to go solve things, even if you don't know the answers. I mean, you're building a company today that has way more big questions in front of it than it does, you know, behind it. And every little signal is accumulative. It's compounding. And while it's not a nonlinear, it's a nonlinear path. You're like, I just need to do that 5 times and then build a system that does it 50 and then 500 and 5,000, and it'll solve itself if I get these 5 right. Once you know how to do that, you start looking at all the components of the business. Each company teaches you a part of it. You know how to stack an organization to be able to solve something important, and hopefully it grows. And your timing's right, but you're sensitive to all those things that you just didn't know before. So that's where the confidence lives, is just keep taking shots until you're forced to learn it.
So there's a lot to unpack in terms of what you said. Tell everyone, I mean, we got to go through these, David, one by one, because they're very interesting and each one is a little different. But tell everyone what a roll-up is. I don't think they really, most students don't really know what it is. It's not as common today. It's a little bit common if you're a private equity firm. But what is a roll-up? What happened to that company when it went public? And give us the history of your next 2 companies. And then I want to know how you bounce back from a failure when you have a big success. What prompts you to keep going?
A roll-up is where you have a hypothesis or a business plan, to keep it simple. You raise a bunch of money and you say, there are many of these similar companies in the world, and any one of them, albeit meaningful, is never going to be as valuable than more of them together. So it could be technology, engineering services, could be, more often than not, it's not about deeper technology and SaaS. It's more services businesses, which is what we were with technology enablement. But there was just a lot of similar companies that together could build a really big company if you got the culture right and all those things. And we were backed by Omnicom, and I joined that company. It was founded by some other people, and we ended up taking it public, and it's actually still around today. It was one of their 5 big plays at the beginning of the internet. So there's lots of capital going towards businesses that could solve technical problems in the beginning of the digital era. Today, I'd say it's equivalent to, there will be equivalent to services companies in the AI era, people solving big digital, generative digital challenges for big companies will be similar to this. I think not unlike the internet era, which you were a wildly successful founder of one of the first, generations of those businesses. This AI era, I think, has a similar level of gravitas around it. So the difference between that and, let's say, the multiverse or the metaverse, or even social media to some extent. While there's several big companies, I think this era is much more substantial than that chapter. So to talk about the failure piece, I can tell you about an experience around that I think is quite profound in terms of how to start over. But maybe just unpack that a little more, because we can go lots of directions around that one question alone. Is there a particular piece of experience that you want to jump into that I can try to illuminate?
I think we should expand on it quite a bit, because I think one of the great motivators in our life is fear of failure. And I think it's the primary reason why people don't start companies, even though so many people out there, millions, tens of millions of people don't start their companies. So you failed. Maybe you can talk about 1 or 2 of your failures, what you were thinking, how depressed you were, how tough it was, and then how you bounced back from those.
The one that comes to mind was it was called Clickable, and on paper, and publicly speaking, it wasn't, right. People didn't really understand what had happened, but I'll just share with you what that story was, and I think it'll be illuminating. So we had built this back, and this is 2007 to 2012. We built a software company, a SaaS organization that was focused on data and machine learning related to search and social advertising. So, there are lots of different APIs, lots of different frictions. So how you manage search and social across many platforms was difficult. And this will seem totally captain obvious, but if you could plug all of that data into a single interface that taught you and told you how you're doing every day and what you needed to do to improve without having to think about it, you could just make decisions. That would make your job 10 times easier. And that's effectively what we did. And we raised, $30+ million over the period of like 6 years, a couple hundred people, 250 plus people. And we built this organization and we made one fatal mistake. And we did this at a very high profile level. We did this, with Founders Fund and some of those famous VCs in the world, Albert Wenger at USV, Rick Heitzman at First Mark, who are all, thank God, still friends of mine. But we ended up building, this is the story, we ended up building basically a Siamese twin-headed kid in the world. So, and it turns out as a business, what that means is we were solving two marketplaces at once. And what we realized is because we had done a very big contract to white label our company, we were growing fast, but not fast enough. So we white labeled it and brought it to a very significant credit card company, of which the president of the company is still a good friend of mine as well. She has helped, just been very kind to me over the years. But we took it to their masses, and we ended up really bifurcating the vision of the company. So same promise, same patents, things, but we turned out we were focused on the small and medium-sized business, and we were focused on the enterprise side of the world. So before too long, we realized this is not one company, it's two companies. We lost focus. And it's really a fatal outcome, to be honest with you. So despite an incredible talented culture and people and brand and all the things that we won, the thing that our fatal mistake is we lost focus. And we did that at the end of the day as a CEO, that's on you, right? Like the buck stops here is real. There's no one to look at. You can say you're the smartest, most brilliant board in the world, but at the end of the day, you're making the decisions. And I had to take ownership of that. And we ended up almost being acquired in for actually very significant numbers twice before we ended up raising a Series C. And we raised that Series C. My board basically said, we want you to sell the company immediately and effectively take that beautiful kid and rip it in two, which is so heartbreaking because you love the people, you love the business, and it's what we had to do. And so we had to do it very quickly. So while I was trying to do that, it nearly killed me. I have 3 little kids. I was working, honestly, 80 to 100 plus hours a week. Night feedings, everything, leading this whole thing through crisis. And I had actually had a acid reflux heart attack I discovered years later, where I got out of bed one night and fell as if a saber sword was driven through my chest, literally flat on the ground. And I thought I was going to die, literally die. And I just muscled through the pain. I went back to bed and kept working, literally. And I got a body scan a couple years ago, and they're like, oh, you almost died, and here's the scar to prove it. I'm like, yep, I know exactly what happened. It was really foolish, to be honest with you, but the stress was crazy. So anyways, this one night, David Smith, my chief revenue officer of the company, calls me, and he says, David, he said, why are you making this so hard? And I was like, what are you talking about making it hard? I'm killing myself trying to get this company just to safety. And he said, no, he said, actually, you're making this harder than it needs to be. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, this company is about you, which is why it's failing. And he goes, and I was like, I was getting angry, honestly. I was very angry when he said this to me. And he said, listen, David, he goes, you are more than this company. And the sooner you realize it, the sooner the company will get to safety, because we're all here to help you. And no one can help you because you can't see the company because you're seeing yourself. And he was 100% right. I was trying to drive and control out of self-interest to survive because I was afraid of failure. beyond supernaturally afraid of failure. And I said, I was so exhausted. I said, well, what does that even mean? Like, how would I solve this? He goes, you need to give it over. And I was like, give it over to what? He goes, to God or the universe. And I was like, what does that even mean at this moment? You can imagine you're thinking through this in the crisis of it. He goes, well, what it means is that you accept all of the outcomes. And my next line, this is verbatim, I said, you mean failure? He goes, that's exactly what I mean. My next line verbatim was, you mean public failure? He says, yes. And my next verbatim line was, I'm like, the cover of Insider? And he's like, yes. And in that moment, I literally broke. And I realized, like, all of the possibilities are possible. Failure is equally possible as success. And it's not about me, and I couldn't control it. And I literally surrendered. I literally at that moment gave it over. And as I was 32, I'm 50 now, I laid on the ground in my attic, my last home, little kids in the downstairs, and I sobbed like a baby, like a biblically on the ground, flat as I could get, sobbed for not for a little time, like a long time. And it just broke me. And I realized, like, this is going to happen. And I finally accepted it. And I got up in this puddle and I sat there in this kind of lotus position and I started to, like, meditate and pray about this giving it over part. And I realized this is the mental model. I'm almost done. It's a long story, but it's an important one. As I felt like I was running through these paths of thorns. The harder I ran, the more it shredded me and I was bleeding out. And the mental model renewal I had, the miracle of this moment, and probably one of the most courageous decisions of my life, is I imagined myself being lifted out of that road onto a clean, brand new road of life. Brand new. But I imagined that road as if I started walking it when I was 20. I had to say, I re-upped. I re-believed. I felt foolish. But the truth was, everything was still possible. All the opportunities in the world were still available to me if I believed it and thought it and found it. But I was wiser and humbler in that moment. And I began to walk again. And I went to sleep. I went to bed. And I slept for the first time in ages. And I got up next day. And I was open, humble, honest, asking questions. I went back tonight, got up again next day, slept. And then slept again and again. And about a month later, quote unquote, out of the blue, I got a phone call from an old friend, said, "You want to sell your company?" I said, "Yes, I do." He goes, "Great, because I need all of it." And within a month, we were acquired. There's no co-CEOs, as you know. He's like, "There's only one boss here, my friend." He's like, "You're out." I'm like, "Great." And then I was gone. I was out. And it was all, everyone got to safety. And I started over and I went out and said, I'm going to do 20 years of learning in 1 year. And I started to write the Startup Playbook. I did 40 interviews with the best living entrepreneurs I knew, friends of friends. And I listened, I said the questions, how do you bet your life? And I learned a generation of learning that came down to the single introduction called the 5 lenses. It began Bionic. And we bootstrapped a company next 7-8 years to 25 million revenue and sold it 2 years ago. No way that would have happened had I not gone through the brokenness. So success is a bad educator. So long story, but renewal begins because your willingness to go through the brokenness and give it over and start again.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but before we jump back in, I want to know if you've ever thought about what you need to do to reach the next level of success in your life. Over the last 25 years, I've been an advisor to more than 50 companies. I've invested nearly 100, including Google, Lyft, and Seagate. And I also co-founded a company that today is worth more than $15 billion. I've been incredibly blessed in my journey, and at this stage in my life, I want to give back. I want to share the lessons I've learned so you can reach incredible success way faster than I did. In my own journey, I've learned that having the right mentor is a massive advantage to achieving our goals. I'm hugely passionate about mentoring others, and I'm looking for a few hungry entrepreneurs who are excited to take action on their journey to incredible future success. So if that's you, I've got an opportunity. In the description of this video, there's a link where you can apply to work with me. All you need to do is answer a few simple questions, and if you're a good fit, my team will reach out so we can build a game plan together. All right, now let's get back to the video.
That's an amazing story. We're going to talk about a lot of the things that you just mentioned a little bit later, including the Startup Playbook, which is an incredible book. I recommend everybody who wants to be founder of a company or start their own business, read that book. You're a serial entrepreneur with no experience in business whatsoever. Can you learn to be a serial entrepreneur, or do you have to be born with the DNA? And what are you looking for in terms of the traits of a founder? What traits will make an entrepreneur successful when they start a new business?
I mean, I would say the born entrepreneurs are very rare. And even the rare ones are probably environmentally conditioned at home, honestly. Maybe out of necessity in many cases, the radical ones, radical necessity, trauma or parenting. And then for the other ones, probably cultural inside the home, entrepreneurial. I'm trying to do that with my own sons if they want to. I just know it's a very, very hard journey, and most likely they're not going to be successful because most entrepreneurs are not. So the second part of your question is what makes them successful is their ability to quickly learn the solutions to the challenges of building the business in service of this factor, which I think is the primary, which is an obsession with the problem. So it's either a product or service solving a need in the world that's on time. That's basically it. I mean, if you want to dumb it down. So the question is how long can you sustain the level of effort and humility it takes to solve the building a business to solve that problem? And if that's not years and years and years and years, typically 8 years of 800-hour weeks, you don't care enough, which means don't do it unless you are obsessed. That would be my simple version of how to do the calculation of whether you should build a company or not.
Where does creativity, culture, and leadership fit in as ingredients to build a successful company and be a successful entrepreneur?
I mean, the whole concoction of grittiness, resourcefulness, creativity, all that stuff, hustle, grit, I think they all live in this willingness to set down all of your bias with the answers just to find the answer that's going to work. It's sort of, you don't have a lot of time and resources. And so the longer you hang on to your absolute belief that this is a way to solve something, the longer it could take and you could be wrong. So most likely, and this is not in all cases, so I'm saying this at a very meta level, but for let's say 80% of the business problem, most likely any part of the business that you're facing to create your business to become undead, as I described, dead, undead, has already been solved successfully, just not by you. So if you can assemble those questions of the things you solve in the right order, the right time, the right talent, which we talked about, the three things, then you can go get the answer because you can hear it, see it, or buy it, and then assemble it. So I think the more you're I'm going to learn it and do it my way, the more likely your learning cycles just simply aren't fast enough and you're unlikely to be successful. I'd rather find it successfully solved by someone else because I'm humble and curious and I can build relationship and adopt it in the spirit of, as Dali once said, great artists steal. You kind of have to do that. I mean, you and I have talked about this for our own businesses today, at least in the early stages.
So we've met so many entrepreneurs along the way. I don't know. I've met over 1,000, David. I'm sure you've met over 1,000 as well, maybe several thousand. And I always ask them what the motivation is. And their motivations really are all over the map. But the one that sticks out the most is a lot of founders are motivated by money. They read the story of somebody successful like you or me or Mark Zuckerberg. They all want to be that person. Where should money rank in our success? And what are the other motivations that founders should have and think about when they start their own business?
Over the years, for the last 15 years, I've been going to the TED conference, and there was this guy, brilliant guy named Richard St. John or John St. Richard. I'm blanking. He's a wonderful psychologist. And he'd walk around the conference and he would ask all the entrepreneurs this one question, which is, well, many questions, but the primary one was just, how much money did you have to create or have before money was not an issue? You could start over. And so as he did this hundreds of times, he learned the answer to this question, which is, the answer was 10 million liquid. And this was Gates or, Bezos. It didn't really matter who it was, Cuban. They all basically said, After that amount of money didn't matter to me anymore because I kind of bought my time. Like I could start over, not lose if I own my assets and begin again, and didn't matter really, or lose it all and begin again. And so the point is like that is a lot of money. Let's be honest, it's not a small amount of money, but it's not so much that a successful entrepreneur in your lifetime would actually have. So it's completely achievable relative to your risk and time. But the thing is that people weren't saying like an order of magnitude bigger. So they're not really motivated by money above a certain level. And it's sort of equivalent to be on a question of like, in other parts of the economy where people say, how much money do you need to be happy as an employee? And people are like, I think the answer is like 75 to 100 grand or something a year, which is a lot less than you realize. So the point is, money is not the primary motivator, but it's still motivating. And so that's an important part of this. But I'd say there's another part of this that's actually motivating is the loss aversion to losing it. So like you created it to a certain level, and there's all the things that come with that. And then you're motivated because you want to sustain it or not lose it. And you're going to go back to a different type of energy in yourself as an entrepreneur to create the next thing for different reasons. So I'd say another third element, another prism into this, which is there's no amount of money that you're going to ever make that's ever going to solve the issue of enough if you don't know what your version of contentment is. So the point is you have to determine what content means in your mind and your life and decide what that is. And it's whether you achieve more or less than that, you know what it is. Your self-awareness and knowledge defines the version, what money means to you. So it's less about a single answer and more about dimensions into how to think about that. So let's separate that from the last piece, which you said is that truly a motivator by it? So it's really not a motivator in the sense that you need to know the qualities of how you think about it, what it can do for you. Because money is in terms of entrepreneur's journey is just sort of like engendered life. It can solve things. It can fix things, right? My brother-in-law says a problem that can be solved, money is not a problem. Real problems are health and relationship, things that are in your mind. Like those are things that are problems. So knowing what it can solve, but also the absence of money leads to bad decision making too, and it leads to unnecessary struggle, right? So it just leaves you with fewer choices. And if you need a lot of choices when you're building something or creating something, it can be a tool, not all the tools, one of the tools to help you accelerate that learning. Elon is one of one in our lifetime, honestly. I mean, eclipsing even some of the greatest of all time. But also recognize, like, one of his great gifts is he can tell stories technically and market stories. And if I would argue that he's probably raised, I have no idea actually, hundreds of billions. I don't know what the actual number is, but let's say it's probably between $1 and $300 billion in his lifetime is my guess. So like, you can make a lot of mistakes, but he's taking on big challenges. So you need to learn a lot of mistakes. So all these things take into account your ability to create something of value, depending on how much you obsess about the size of that problem and what you need to go solve it, of your own resources or that of others. So hopefully I'm not talking past you, hopefully around. It's less of an answer, more mindset and how to think about it, because it's really not the problem, if that makes sense.
One of the things I've noticed over the years, David, is that at some younger age, you got a number, and it may be $1 million. I usually hear $5 million or $10 million when I pose this question to somebody. And one of the things that I notice is that the number always increases with age. Why? Because you have to buy a house. It depends where you live, obviously. In some parts of the world, with some parts of the United States, you can buy a beautiful home, 5,000, 4,000, 6,000 square foot home with 2 acres of land for $1 million. I live in LA. You live in New York. It's very expensive. You can't touch a house on the west side of Los Angeles, a teardown house for $3 million. And if you want to live in a nice neighborhood, it's $5 million. In some neighborhoods, it's $10 million. So if you buy a $5 million house, you have to have a lot of wealth behind that behind that wealth. At some point, you're going to have a family. You're going to send your kids to private school. My daughter goes to Cornell. It's $82,000 tuition there. So at some point, the $5 million after tax, you have to make $10 million essentially to have $5 million and have $10 million. You got to make $20 million. So the number does increase as we age. At least I've seen that in my career and as I'm mentoring people and in my own life as well.
I mean, it's, again, this is, your world gets smaller too. So it's all, as the famous, it's all relative, right? And, as you're going through, I mean, I didn't grow up with any real resources, lots of love, but I mean, I didn't even know what investment banking was until my 20s, right? Or what real entrepreneur was. But I have a bunch of friends who I've grown up with over the last 25 years. We belong to this email list, very confidential email list, and you would know some of the people on the list. But we were together for a long time when most of us had nothing, right? And over time, like some of the people on the list became, I mean, crazy successful, like lifetimes of capital. And a lot of them are journey people who are very successful economically, but it took them 2 startups to 3 startups in 20, 25 years. And that's even in the boundary of successful entrepreneurs around the boundary you're talking about, that's most of the cases. It's actually, it's so rare. It's so rare. You talk about someone who earns or has exited after tax over 100 million. It's just, they themselves are a unicorn. Like, it's just all the factors of their perseverance, curiosity, market conditions, capital markets would have to conspire so perfectly for those scenarios to happen that, and they themselves would have to create lightning in a bottle. It just doesn't happen. Your expectations should be, if the outside forces were greater than we're just fortunate for you. That's my experience, honestly. I mean, with the exception of 1 or 2 people, that's almost never, ever happened. All my successful friends, just to be specific, are, who've had great success, are between the 10 and 50 number, probably, is my guess.
I had Mark Cuban on my show, and he said you can't be a billionaire without being lucky. Is that true?
I think it's more true than not. I think it's mostly true, I would guess. I mean, given the factor of time, it depends. I mean, Mark's really young, but like if you look at generational, like truly first generation wealth or first generation success, the one factor in all of it that would influence my judgment of that would just be how long have they been building the same business. So like if you, it's the same reason why 80% of Warren Buffett's wealth has been created in the last, 10 years? Whatever the number is, I can't remember what, but something like that. But it's like, given 20, 30 years in the same business and you're winning, there's an inevitability that you're going to achieve that type of outcome just based on law of large numbers and ownership. More of the same, better. But very few companies in the world we play in, for everyone else, are typically, at our age, generational type of companies that compound in the same way. Either the markets aren't big enough, you can't get your arms around it big enough, you can't dominate something that without having to sell a lot along the way. The conditions, even the arc of those conditions, have to be perfect for you to be able to own something sustainably long enough to produce those type of returns. If it's not a meteorite, if that makes sense.
You talk about the value of compounding, and I think that is the secret to long-term wealth. Growing companies over long periods of time. So many founders today, they want to get rich quick. They read about the story. Someone founded a company, and a year later, they sold it for $1 billion. What's your advice to all those people sitting out there listening today? There's thousands of them who are saying, gosh, that's really what I want to do. I want to make a ton of money when I'm young, and then I can do whatever I want.
I think you'll be sad. You'll be very disappointed with that life, honestly. All the joy is the work. It's the becoming. It's the grind in the valley. It's the self-discovery. It's knowing yourself, knowing your team. It's receiving the wholeness and the experience of growth, and then it's learning to be it in a state of being because you've gotten to a place where you can. So I don't think there is really a shortcut to the happiness that they're all trying to get to, and it's certainly not money. It's the journey, and it's the becoming part of it that matters the most. And it's all the joy is because you're with people you love, solving a problem you love, in a journey you love, and you're honest about it with yourself, and you accept the grace that it's going to be imperfect in that. So I'm trying to get out of that, trying to get through that more quickly. Like, why? Like, if you're fortunate enough to get through it faster, it's probably not because of you anyways. You're just very fortunate, and therefore, hopefully, you can do more with it. I mean, you know this. I mean, like, it's amazing. When people try to fight for that, what it exacerbates is this insight, which is, when they get the success, the money, they're a little generous. They become massively generous. But they're equally so if someone's all they care about is that they're a little asshole, they turn into a gigantic asshole. Like, whatever it is going to be the inevitability. It's going to be accentuated so graphically to the world. Like, do you really want to be that person who hasn't solved himself and let that graphically be you in the world with all these resources? Probably not. I mean, like, it's waiting for you as you become it.
We've talked about some of the things that are necessary for success, but one thing we did not talk about, which has been one of the hallmarks of my successful career, has been preparation. Not ordinary preparation. I'm talking about something that I've coined extreme preparation, going above and beyond, doing research and preparation that no one else has ever done before. How successful has preparation been to your success? And can you give us some examples of how extreme preparation has contributed to your success?
This is a place that I really admire you a great deal. And it's also the difference between why I was a creative and a designer, industrial thinker, and you went to law school, right?
which I hated, by the way.
Right, but we both did for different reasons. But we truly look at the world structurally from a different place. So, for example, and I have so much to learn from you about this in the way. So, it's like on a spectrum, a continuum of, like, on the one hand, probably pathologically optimistic, which is where I began, and irrationally pessimistic on the other end. We probably began in opposite sides of this continuum, but we've walked to the middle, which is the rational optimistic view based on learned fact, right? So some learned fact is studied and prepared for, some is experienced, right? It's like going, as Dick Costello, a buddy always says, he goes, my job is to get out of the dark alleys and find the light. So how I get down those dark alleys is our own style. So one could be a thinking and studying and preparation. The other could be like, I can run down a dark alley faster than anybody else and get out of it because I'm honest quickly and get to the same light. Does that make sense? So, but I would benefit greatly, and I'd be a better entrepreneur if I did greater preparation, except for one area. And I know this is true about you, and I know it's true, is that when I go do what I do, whether it be speaking or meeting with CEOs or my town halls or for building a company, writing the sort of cultural playbooks, I prepare like hell. Like I spend an insane amount of time, even if I know the content, trying to understand who's in the audience, what is the from to, what's the miracle they need, the slides, everything. So when I go in, I do not wing it. I don't wing it in front of my company. I don't wing it in front of my clients or partners. I don't wing it on stage. I don't wing it in front of investors. I will prepare 2 to 5x more than anyone else because I'm going in there having successfully done it in my mind, in the same way Bo Jackson went on his alter ego and did it on the field before he ever ran the play. So different versions of preparation, but all vital to however you organize and manage yourself to get down the field, so to speak.
I always ask myself, and I coach people, and this is a key question that everyone should keep in my mind, is there any other thing or tidbit or something I can find on page 47 of Google results, or after reading through 30 transcripts of different podcasts, that I can do to prepare so I'm the most prepared person that anybody has ever met with? And that's the mentality that I coach people, that I think is just critical, how to separate yourself from hundreds of other people.
Did that as you opened the podcast today with a couple of life facts that I'm sure I've sprinkled in a lot of other podcasts, but never cohesively into one. So it was very interesting you brought those things up, and it also shows that you care. And that's why I love you anyways, but I appreciate you doing it. And it matters because it affects the sort of entanglement and the karma of relationships and the will you want to do things for people.
It establishes goodwill. It establishes respect. It makes people want to deal with you more than they would any other person. It helps you win deals when you know the material better than anybody else. It helps you get jobs, promotion. It helps you hire better people. And it's true in any industry, in any field, whether you're a doctor, lawyer, entrepreneur, any other field, professional athlete. I've coached some with $100 million contracts. In anything you do, it can be critical and a differentiator to your success, and you can achieve results that otherwise would not have been possible or seemed impossible without it.
It's true. People want to be on journeys where they're going to learn with people who care the most. And I having done some really incredible deep work over the last 8-10 years, there's this sort of kind of final piece to this whole becoming philosophy, which has been central to my life, which is this idea that the purpose of all of this is to loving each other. So whether it be the work or individually, but the idea is first is the deep work to learn that for yourself, which can get you back to a state of abundance and love and not fear that guides your life, because you know your why, you know your intention. You're no longer trying to fix yourself from the outside. In fact, I tell my sons is like, don't fix yourself. Don't be excellent sheep. Don't be well-rounded. Find your need in the world, the forces, your giftedness, and just do that all your time. You're good enough, right? But the loving each other part is to not transactionally love people or try to get something. Is to just be with them in a loving way while they hopefully are in the same journey. And the upside of thinking about it this way is that the people who are there just to get something from you, just the transactional quote unquote love people, they'll fall away. And they weren't very helpful anyways. In your personal life, your professional life, you really want to fill your life with people who love loving you. They first order themselves so they can be whole, aligned, so they can walk with you in that same journey, shoulder to shoulder. That's a really amazing way to think about the journey. When I find people like yourselves who care the most in preparation, but how they show up, I know that that's the origin of your mindset, and it's very special.
I appreciate the kind words, and I have similar love for you and admiration for you, and you've done so much, and you've helped so many other people. So kudos to you on that, and thank you for that. I want to talk about your transition from a successful entrepreneur to angel investor. You've invested in more than 40 companies, including Airbnb, Stripe, SpaceX. There have been many, many more. 70% of all of our returns come from 7% of all capital deployed, you've said. And Fred Wilson, a famous VC, has said the only legal way to get 100 times your capital in the world is to make a VC investment. Can you talk about the network effect, and are those numbers really true?
I mean, they probably are true. I mean, I know they're true. So I've done, I think I need to update that number. It's over 80 angel investments now. So I'm an LP in, I think, 6 VC firms. Honestly, I stopped doing angel investing because it's rare now, because it takes a lot of energy and time. And also you want to show up for people because that's why you did it, right? It's sort of like, it's not with the money. It's just because you want to be with them. But, the portfolio theory around this is really 2 things to think about. One is, if you look back on the portfolio theory, 7% equals 7% of the unbound returns. So the question is why did I invest in the 7% that produced those outcomes? And there's actually 2 investment signals. The first is conviction, right? Which really is kind of describing an understanding of the forces, the understanding of the need, and the question of the proprietary gift of the entrepreneur. There's a really interesting company called Fundify that uses AI to actually look at how to get from 0 to 10x in terms, or 1 to 10x in your returns. And it's largely around 3 boundaries of like the number of investments you make. You have to make up to 25 to 30 investments to even get your money back. The second 2 factors were just the amount of time. So you spend less than 10 hours alone, it goes from like 1.5 to 2x. But if you use it on a network of greater than 20 hours of diversified thinking, you can get to like 9 or 9.5x. So these qualities of the portfolio matter. The second signal is non-consensus, meaning if you have consensus something's a good idea, it's probably not a good idea. Your portfolio has to have extreme bets in it in the same way it has extreme things that you know. And that diversification Fred is describing that third, a third, a third. A third will go to zero. A third will get your money back 1 to 2x, and the other third will be 3 to 5x. And you might get 100x, his legal question. And that's really the high conviction, non-consensus. So you have to put yourself in a network. A lot of the investments that I've made that are the ones you mentioned otherwise come through network effect. Founders Fund, in that case, those cases, personal relationships where I've invested in multiple times through their failure. I just kept going and they got good. In fact, the odds of investing in an entrepreneur who failed are higher than if you're a successful entrepreneurs, because the VCs know how fortunate you are. So all these factors lead to making good decisions, better decisions in venture.
You just mentioned something very interesting, which is counterintuitive to people. You'd rather invest in founders that have failed than first-time founders. It's also interesting that most first-time founders do fail. The probability of success is extremely, extremely low. Do you invest in founders that have failed 2 and 3 and 4 times and are going forward on the 5th try?
I would say the second and not the third. Because the second means the second one, definitely. I've done that many times. I invested in an entrepreneur who I wrote a check and he blew up like 100 days later and he started another one. I kept going. That was a stretch, but it was like, I've done that several times. And so I have a couple friends, I'm not going to mention who they are, who've had extraordinary success doing that. So 3 times means you probably are bad at the outside forces, the learning part of it. Your bias could potentially be too strong. Your understanding of forces, you could potentially just be chasing things, esteem issues, like you're chasing super fancy technology things and you really have no proprietary gift because you're afraid of who you are. There's it's just coming from the wrong place. And that's why I think I would 2, not 3 is the simple answer for me.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the word assholes. And
I've never said that in a podcast before, by the way. That's the first time.
This is not my first time, but I think it's an important thing to talk about.
On a podcast.
It's you and I are very lucky. We have our own capital. We have the ability not to invest in assholes. What does that mean exactly? Who's an asshole? And what kind of people don't you invest in? And how important is it to be nice and a good person in our success?
It's a really provocative question. I mean, all entrepreneurs to some degree have to be what we just said. It just is. Like you have to have your ability to say no to people in very uncomfortable situations. Be able to terminate people in the first sentence, regardless of what they think of you. No is probably half your job, honestly, is dealing with, I mean, our Mark Andreessen, why he doesn't want to be a CEO, he says, because it's bad news all day long. If that doesn't affect your attitude, nothing will. So read the 2 greatest books of all time, in my view, of entrepreneurship are both Ben Horowitz's books. The Hard Things About the Hard Things and What You Do Is Who You Are. Those books are the Bible. And if you don't, Ben Horowitz, who was my first book, he's not a close personal friend, but I do periodically once every decade reach out to him. I think he's the greatest living entrepreneur of our lifetime. He thinks along these boundaries around love, but he is a tough founder. And that's part of the job. So if people think you're an asshole for that, then he's perfectly fine with that because his mission is bigger than that. So I think it's part of the job. It's just not part of the character, if that makes sense.
Let's flip it a little bit. Not everyone has the ability to work with everyone they want to be. Most people work for companies. We've all had very difficult bosses in our lives. And one of the things that I found, David, over the years is, and I said this yesterday to my interns, is work is work. And you're going to have difficult bosses, and you're going to have to learn to deal with those bosses and in life. Because if you can't get along with people who are difficult, you're going to have difficult customers, clients, whatever the case may be. You can't just walk away. What's your advice to all of the students, young professionals, mid-career or late career professionals who want to pack up, want to go across the street, think the grass is greener. And even the younger people, and I get this a lot, is they go home, they complain to their parents, and their parents say, if you're not happy, you should leave, which I think is some of the worst advice you could give your kids.
I mean, it's they're doing no service to them, because there's so many opportunities to leave every part of your life when they're bad, right? Often. And again, if you believe to whatever degree you have been convinced by this or not in this conversation that success is a bad educator, then actually the opposite is true. You should actually pursue hardship as early as you can in your life, because it'll shape the quality of all the life, the back half of your life when you didn't earn it. So like earning the good life is function of your ability to pursue the hard life early. So growth lives in discomfort. It lives in friction. I've had a number of really well-known executives who've gone through success and failure publicly. I've had the good fortune of sort of coaching just as friends. And, a couple in particular where their success, they're quite famous, and the company's success struggled. I told them, my advice is don't try to get out of this. Like, let the glacial pain of being ground down into basically nothing right now publicly shape you. Let it break you. Let it break off all the stuff that doesn't belong there anymore. Don't hold up on the gravity of the weight of this moment to like try to fight it. Like, no, like let it break you. Let it shape you. Don't get out. Stay in the bottom of the valley. And they were very much like, I just want to leave, go away, whatever it is, that's the whole, there's a great book by Martha Beck called The Way to Integrity. And it basically, her thesis is about Dante's Inferno of there's no way out, there's only through. And in going through is where all the growth happens. And the way to go through in the beginning, and again, I want to make sure that I say this publicly. This is a moral imperfection of my own, is that this is an area of growth for myself, which is, the very first rule is tell yourself the truth. Don't lie to yourself. You can lie to the world, but at least you are awake. So that's one area of my life that over the last several years, I began doing. I haven't successfully did that to everywhere else in my life, but your life changes and learning happens when you begin to tell the truth to the world that you're telling to yourself, but it must begin with you. So trying to get out of something internally breaks that definition of integrity right there. So you got to sit in the hardship.
An entrepreneur walks into your office. What are the 3 most important things that you look for as they start opening their mouth and making their pitch?
Before they start talking?
During the whole thing.
Okay.
During the meeting, and then as you're making an investment decision, whether they're the same and they're different. And I guess they're not always the same. Okay.
So first is why them, proprietary gift. Like, what is their secret? So the 300 hours I spent with those 40 entrepreneurs in the Startup Playbook, the number one thing they said over and over again is they had a proprietary. They understood. They had a secret, basically. I knew something and how to solve it, and no one in the world did. So prop gift is the first one. Why them? Second is timing. Their understanding of the forces. Within the next 3 to 5 years, if we do this, it is an inevitable outcome. So it's about their understanding of their being there when it happens, right? So why them, the force, and then the last piece is really the unfair advantage to solve that problem. So like secret is their understanding of it. The timing of the force is their understanding of the force. And the third is the problem, right? Their ability to solve it in a way that creates an unfair advantage. Once those 3 things happen, you start to see like, okay, this person, there will be a winner in this space. It'll be asymmetrical, and they have every bit of chance to be there on time as the top 2 or 3 people in the world to do this. They're born to do this, and given the 10,000 Gladwelling hours to pull it off, they're going to be one of 3 that's possible for them to pull it off.
What are the 3 worst things that an entrepreneur can do that you say, no chance in hell, this is over, and I'm not funding this or being a part of this?
I would say overconfidence is probably number one. Like overconfidence means control bias, means they're inflexible. Two is and this is the word I would say, which is their drive is ambition, not obsession. Like you can tell, like it's really about them, their career, their success, and not the problem. That makes sense? Like the huge obsession versus ambition are very different things, and you can sniff that out. And the third would be, I don't really like to feel like false, like urgency bias. Like if you don't do this, it'll be someone else. Like it's like, then it's probably wrong fit for me. Like it's like, if somebody comes in like, well, I have 5 people lined up and I'd love to have you in the round, but if it's not you, then you can't react this fast. It's probably the wrong time. It's more like, listen, we have the round done. Okay, fine. We have $500,000, $100,000, and we just want you in. Like we'd love to have you in. We don't care if you write a check for $1 or $250,000 or whatever it is. And we just want your karma and your network and all the things you can provide in a way that you can be successful with us in it. Okay, fine. That's fine. That's fine. But like, if the concoction is like money or there's other people for that. That's just not what I want to do.
So many successful people that I know and that you know as well think I'm successful. I don't have to do things to work on myself. But one of the things that I noticed about you, David, as we got to know each other, is you're incredibly self-reflective. You're incredibly self-aware. And you're on a journey to constantly improve yourself in your way of life, and being a better father and husband in all aspects of your life. Can you talk about what motivates you to do that? And if you're comfortable talking about this, can you tell us about your experiences with the toad and what it is?
Yes, I will share that with you. Despite Prince Harry going to, going to court order for his visa right now on these issues. It really, again, it goes back to the whole becoming, which is the 3 stages of this for me. And again, this is not prescriptive. It just is my journey, is the idea of knowing yourself completely, the ability to get below, know your intentions, know your why, and get to a state. And that journey is, you got to walk amongst the subconscious bottom ocean of your life to figure out what are the 2 or 3 things that happen to you that every decision, your dope, your whatever it is, your money, sex, power, achievement that you're trying to feel better from originates from, so you can move past it. And knowing that, if you start to dig a hole in your life, you can spend 20, 30 years at the bottom of the hole. You can just blow up your whole life and start digging another hole again if you don't know who you are, right? Try to fix it. And the answer is like, it's pretty wasteful way to spend your life. So why not learn? Why not grow? And the becoming, that first stage, you got to know yourself. And the second stage is that loving point, which is you got to learn to reconnect from your soul to your human self. They're different things, and receive that love so you can show up for other people. So the last phase of this is just about the being part. If you've read Eckhart Tolle, I'm sure many people you have, which is when you really go through these experiences, you start to realize that, if time is an illusion, which it largely is, the more the pain in our lives is because we're looking back with regret and we're looking forward with anxiety, right? And right at the boundary of the looking back and looking forward is control. And so to give away that pain, to eliminate control is really a simple concept, which is just surrendering, right? So if you surrender at the edges, then you're right here in the entire experience. And then you could just work on becoming someone that will inevitably be that person in the future. Like, if there's an inevitability to your life of who you're being every single day on a compounding basis, that's what will happen. when you really deeply, deeply think about who you are and your why and your intention and your work and your behavior and your thought and how you show up in the conscious lens of the world, if that becomes the quality of your person, then everything will be inevitable. And the more we surrender to it, the more that's possible. So like the experience with, as you described, the toad is really the beginning of that journey. We were talking about this because you did an interview with Mike Tyson, and obviously someone who's dealt with extraordinary trauma and in his life, which was one of his primary energy sources. And now, as his soul has been revealed, in the world, he's a very, very, very special human. Very special.
Incredible human being.
If you ever listen to Muhammad Ali speak, his intellect, his mind, his heart, he's just a remarkable human being. And he's courageous in a way that is so rare. And one of the experiences that he went through was this concept of the toad and that journey. But what he experienced and what I experienced is this idea of being one. And as you, I'm going to paraphrase this very briefly, but it's as if all of your conscious energy of your life is moved out of yourself and rises. And as it's rising, it's almost the velocity of its ability to rise is where the concept of dimensions and time start to tear away. It's almost as if we're on this podcast right now, and if I put a frame around your head, Randall's head, Randy goes from 3D to 2D, right? Instantly. That's what dimension is. So imagine that dimension as it's over our head. We're rising into this dimension that goes from 3D to 2D, and we move into it. We become into that plane, into that picture of reality. And as you rise into it, there's no longer a you. There's only one thing. And what that one thing, of which you're part of, says is, now you know. And that piece of the past all understanding is the nature of love, God, the universe as a single thing. And as you leave that and you return to reality, you no longer have a question of like, where do I come from? Where am I going? Because they're all the same. I'm right here. And everything that bounds this experience together is the nature of our being, which is love. So if I know that and I receive it and I can be it, then I can be with you in your journey to discover that too. And that's what loving means. The power of that idea is the boundary between your wholeness and your suffering. So a lot of things you're talking about in your youth, as you're becoming, and I'm not counseling anybody to go through these experiences if they don't want to. Also, I'm not even counseling them to do that while they're young, because it takes half your mind to become friends with half your life to know yourself. You wait till you know yourself. But these are questions of fear and control and expectation. And I'm not saying they didn't serve me in my own journey for anything, but it's not something that would sustain any part of my life going forward, because it's no longer in concert with who I am and who I'm becoming, if that makes sense. So much longer conversation, but what I do hope is that people who are listening, their commitment is to doing the work so that no matter where they end up, that they're happy that they chose that journey and their definition of where they arrived.
I've debated whether to ask this question as I prepare for the podcast, but I want to ask it anyway. Can you briefly describe what the toad is and how it does change people's lives? And I'm also going to say this is not something that I recommend. Actually, I absolutely do not recommend it due to the dangers involved. But Mike Tyson has talked about it. You've talked about it a little bit as well. And if you're comfortable, will you briefly share, without getting into too many of the details? People can look this up on their own if they really want to go into the detail. But can you explain what it is and how it has changed your life, Mike Tyson's life, and many, many people's lives as well?
Yeah, I try to illuminate those ideas. Just the prior question, I think it's a natural psychedelic that exists in both biological and organic form and of DMT. And it basically is a psychedelic, a hallucination that helps you, it breaks down your dimensional awareness. So in the same way, for example, you can see colors in light and in dimension, right? So we see primary and secondary colors in dimensions that we can understand in our 4 and 5D world that we live in today. But if you were to open the spectrum of light, what is light, right? We see primary, tertiary. If you give it enough continuum, X-rays are light. Obviously, photons are light. The dimensions of light that are available to us relative to what we can see in our physical reality versus our subconscious reality are radically different. And these tools open the continuum, the spectrum of our ability to see all of them, depending on your journey. And as a result of that, the interdimensional nature of the questions you can ask and the journeys you experience those, you realize that our conscious physical reality that we live in is a subset, is part of the larger nature of our creation and what it's actually made of. And a lot of these tools, not the least of which is DMT, are tools to open those dimensions up, open up the experiences to know that. And here I would say this last thing, which is, I would over communicate this, which is, these are not toys, they're not recreational, they're profoundly powerful, and they're also something you probably want to experience later in your life, in your 40s and 50s, as you become friends with yourself, so to speak. And I think they're important because they allow you to set down old truths, to know the origin of old truths, and to pick up new truths. And like I described in my 30s about starting over again, lifting myself out of that, thorn road that was getting destroyed by and starting over again. This is not unlike that. It just was it was beginning a new road. It was beginning a new chapter, a new journey to begin again. And we have to begin again. You always have to commit to starting over sometimes to renew a life that's committed to growth and becoming.
We're at the end of the show, and I want to do two things first. First is I want to thank Leslie Newman for setting us up, one of my best friends who I love more than life itself, who gave me the amazing pleasure of introducing us. It's, some of our closest friends come through people we love and close friends. So I think like minds think alike. You are the company you keep. So I really want to thank Leslie, who's been an amazing friend to me throughout the years.
+1. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. And I always conclude my podcast by asking some more open-ended questions. I call this part of my show, Fill the Blank to Excellence. You ready to play?
Okay, bring it.
When I started my career, I wish I had known.
Patience.
The biggest lesson I've learned in my life is?
Loving.
My number one professional goal is?
Impact.
My biggest regret in life is?
So long to stare down truth.
The one thing I've dreamt of doing for a long time but haven't done is?
Writing a book called The Board of Life, which I intend to solve.
The greatest innovation of the next 50 years is going to be?
General AI. It's already done. The superintelligence.
If you could go back in time, the one piece you would give advice to your 21-year-old self is?
Slow down.
If you could meet one person in the world, who would it be?
Living?
Let's go living, and let's go not living.
I'd probably spend time with Sam Altman right now of OpenAI. Dead, I would say one. I'd say Christ or one of the great yogis like Yogananda or something.
David, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on my show. You've been an amazing friend. You've had a tremendous career as an entrepreneur, investor, friend, author. I'm grateful to know you. You're one of these guys that I wish you lived next door to me or in the town next over so we could hang more in person. I do too.
We'd have fun.
We're going to have a lot more fun for the rest of our lives.
Yes.
But thanks for being here. I appreciate you being on my show.